Welcome to chess, ladies and gentlemen. So, I'm gonna have to be honest with everybody. I wasn't in the mood to make videos today at all. So that's why you haven't seen any from me. But I had a comment from, I believe, Shadoww, like 1633. I can't remember the exact numbers that was behind his name, but I had a comment from somebody that mentioned in this particular game that if bishop took g6, it would be a draw. And so first I had to go look at the game and see exactly what, different point or whatever the point is that the person was talking about. So I was able to, so I figured, it was a little bit complicated to try to, answer the question or to comment back, with a comment, because the comment would have been crazy, insanely long. So I figured it would just be best for me to just do a video. So Shadoww, let me check. I don't want to get this thing wrong here. I put it on the thumbnail, but I can't remember it as I sit here real quick. Come on, bro. All right, so Shadoww 1613. So this video is basically just the answer to your question, just to kind of give you a visual as to why the position can't be drawn whatsoever. Black, once you pretty much get, I just chose this point in the game. It's just kind of like a point that I kind of felt would be kind of good to kind of start to get to where I want to get to. And also, I'm not 100% sure which part of the game, because there's about 4 different points that you can sacrifice with bishop takes g6. So I figured I'd just go ahead and cover all of them and just basically show you why at each different point it would just be losing. Even a little bit before this point in the game, black is just completely lost. There's literally nothing that black can do to win the game. There isn't even any hope for a draw. The only thing that black can hope for is that white just blunders something and basically allows a draw. But there isn't a way to force a draw. And you'll be able to see exactly what I mean. So for anybody else out there who watched this and maybe didn't understand why it was resigns, or was thinking maybe black had some type of drawing chance or some type of saving move or something, this would probably be, a good video for you to take a look at, because then it explains, exactly why this game is completely just lost for black. So, like I said, we'll start at this move and we'll just kind of get to the different points that I want to get to. This is move 37, and this is where h4 is played, just like this. I was talking about before, these pawns starting to roll and stuff like that. So, just kind of getting to the point that I want to get to. We have d4, knight takes e5. Anybody who's seen this video, this is going to be very familiar to you. We got bishop to d5, king to g3, rook to b8, rook to d1, rook to b3 with check, and then we block with the rook on d3. Bishop comes to e4, and then rook takes b3, pawn takes b3, and we have knight to c4, bishop to d3, and then knight comes down to b2. We have bishop down to c2, h5, king comes to c6, and then we have g6. And I'll stop at this point. This is the first opportunity that white has, or that black has, to take on g6. So, like I said, I'm assuming that Shadoww 1613, you're talking about move 50. Because, any other sacrifice of the bishop at any of these different points, it doesn't really make any sense whatsoever. We'll get to that point in a minute. But I'm covering, there's about 4 or 5, I think, different possibilities for black to capture on g6. So I'll start with this one. This is actually pretty easy visually, because if bishop takes g6 here, pawn takes g6, and this is just a situation in an endgame where you have split pawns 4 files apart, and there is not a way for a king to hold two pawns that are this far apart from each other. So you're going to be in a situation where one of these pawns is going to automatically promote. So that's the first one. And automatically, like I said, visually, that just really is kind of obvious that that's not a possibility. So I'm pretty sure you weren't talking about that one. But after g6 at this position, king took c5, we saw king to f4. This is the second opportunity that black would have to capture on g6. And it's kind of more of the same. Bishop takes g6, pawn takes g6. And now, instead of split pawns at any point apart, we're dealing with the actual square of the pawn promoting. And as you guys, some of you guys might be familiar with the concept of the square of the pawn. It's just an in-game concept that basically allows you to visualize if a king has the ability to stop a pawn. And the square of this pawn is this right here. And so you guys can see that this king doesn't have the ability to step inside this square anywhere. It can't move here, can't move here. As you guys can see, that's not close enough to the pawn. The pawn is going to automatically promote in 2 moves no matter what black does. And so that's just like, you know, that's an automatic in this one. But like I said, I don't think these were the intervals that Shadoww 1633 was talking about anyway. So I just wanted to make sure I covered all of them. So if we just go back, king came to d6 in that position. We see king to g5, and now this is the next opportunity that black has to sacrifice. So if we see bishop takes g6 here, pawn takes g6, king comes to e7, and then what you have is the ability for the king to cut off the black. Because I mean, basically in this type of an endgame, especially if it's a rook pawn, you're trying to get into the corner. You're thinking that at some point you can get in a situation where the king can get stuck in the corner, and then it doesn't have any legal moves. But the thing that's a little bit unfortunate about that is the fact that you do have these 2 pawns. Right now, this pawn can't move, but you actually have tempo here that you can use with this pawn. So it's really hard for you to stalemate yourself in this type of situation. So the king would come to h6, you'd have king to f8, and then you have king to h7. And then as you guys can see, the king is controlling the queening square, and there is nothing stopping this pawn from promoting. And I mean, as far as this knight is concerned, this knight can literally wait until this pawn promotes before it captures. So it doesn't have to capture when the pawn gets here. It literally can wait for 2 extra moves. So there's just too many tempo that black has. So getting to the point that I think is most relevant, after king to g5, we see king to e7, we see h6, we see king coming to f8. This is another opportunity where the bishop can take on g6. At this particular point, bishop takes g6, king takes g6. We have king to f8, and then we have actually h7, just basically making it to where this king cannot come over any further, and the pawn is just going to promote automatically next move. So that is probably one of the sacrifices by the bishop that makes a little bit more sense. But like I said, I still don't think that any of these are the points that Shadoww 1633 is talking about, or 1613. Yeah, it's talking about. So I'm going to get to the point that I really believe what he's talking about. So king comes to f8. We see king to f6. And I'm pretty positive that it is this move that he is referring to. That, you know, thinking that if you sacrifice the bishop here on g6, which is what I'll show, that after the king takes, you do have the ability to shimmy your king over into the corner. But then it comes kind of back to what I mentioned at the beginning. The fact that you have so many tempo that you can use. So you aren't going to be able to force yourself into a stalemate. But there's actually a very interesting mating idea in this position if you do try to do that. So if we just follow a variation, something that maybe possibly was being thought about. King would come to g8, h7 would check, and then king comes to h8, right? And then so this is the situation probably visually that you are looking at and thinking, okay, can't I stalemate myself this way? Well, you actually can, and this actually sets up the ability for the knight to actually deliver checkmate on f7. And it is because of the position of the knight right now. So we would have, you can do it immediately, or you can just kind of wait around and do it a different way. But basically the idea is exactly the same. You can go knight to c4 immediately because you're visualizing that you're either going to go here or you're going to go here, and then you're going to automatically jump to f7. And as you guys can see, that's mate because you have way too many tempos that you can use from these pawns. The only thing in this particular one that you have to be careful about is the fact that you can get checked if this pawn reaches b1, because you guys can see that that king is on that diagonal. So if black tries to do that immediately with b2, you just snap the pawn off the board. And then when the pawn moves to d3, you literally don't even take it. You allow black to continue to have tempo, and you actually allow the pawn to promote all the way. So knight comes to c4, d2, knight comes to e5, or it can go to d6. Pawn goes to d1, and it equals a queen, and then you have knight to f7, and this is checkmate. So this is the checkmating idea that you have, but you basically want to make sure that you leave black with moves. And that is why you don't just take all of their pawns off the board, because of course, if you were to get in a situation like this and you did take, this is a stalemate. because now the king doesn't have any legal moves. So you just have to make sure that you stay away from that. That's always something that you have to try to be careful about anyway when you're playing in games, period, because stalemates are always present in games, especially when there's just very few pieces on the board. But if we go and look at the other variation, after bishop takes g6, king takes g6, and then we get the king into the corner, a4 is actually the most suggested move, and then you allow d3, knight comes to c4, and you literally, doesn't matter which pawn you move. The major thing in the position is the fact that you forced black. This is why the computer is so accurate, because it forced this pawn to basically block this diagonal first before it moved. So he basically zugzwanged black. It's insane how the computer does. But if you do b2 in this position, you literally don't even have to worry about the pawn promoting, because it's blocked by its own pawn. So it's not going to be checked. Knight comes to e5, b1 equals queen, and then you have knight to f7 with checkmate there. So there's just really never anything. And then if you do want to even play it a different way, we can go back to bishop takes g6. And don't even push h7. You can actually push a4 in this position. Allow d3, push a5, allow d2, push a6, allow d1 equals queen. Snap the queen off the board, and because of the position of the knight, you do have the ability to come back to b2 to capture this pawn once it does move. And you can see that the king has all of these different squares that it can go to. After b2, knight would take b2, but the king isn't stalemated because he literally has all these different squares that he can go to. And then now you're dealing with split pawns 8 files apart, which is just like on a whole nother level of impossible for black to try to do anything about. So in this position, I mean, you could just pick a pawn, like whatever, you know, it doesn't really matter what black does. You just have to make sure that you don't stalemate black, because yeah, let's say for example, like, you know, you check here, or so after knight takes there, you got the king over here. You definitely don't want to stalemate this way. I mean, this is just going to be super embarrassing. Also, you know, you don't want to do, you don't want to do a situation like this. I guess you can do, this would be mating. So that, I mean, you just basically are able to promote with mate. But I mean, as you can see, there's a lot of different, you know, stalemating possibilities. So I'm very positive that answers the question. I kind of understand the idea that you were kind of thinking about when you said that, but the problem is, like, if you erase all of these pieces off of this side of the board, then yeah, you can possibly get into a stalemate situation after you do allow, like I said, if you remove this a pawn, if you remove this knight, if you remove these pieces, and you get into a situation where you do sacrifice the bishop, that is a drawing type of a tool, like, you know, so you at least are familiar with like the drawing capabilities of sacrificing a bishop when you get into an endgame where you leave the opponent with the h-pawn. So that's actually very nice endgame knowledge that you have. But the problem is when you have extra pieces on the board, it kind of changes that type of stuff. Because now, you know, the situation is where, you know, your opponent still has moves. So that is a very like thorough, like, you know, in-depth explanation as to like why it doesn't work in this particular position. But like I said, that's some nice in-game knowledge that you have. And you do at least are aware of, you know, possibilities where you can try to sacrifice a bishop or even a knight or whatever, like to try to leave somebody with an h-pawn. So at least you have the knowledge of like how super drawish, you know, rook pawns can be. They can be very annoying. So hopefully that answers your question. I really feel like it would. And anybody out there who, you know, is not was not familiar with that exact type of an endgame, hopefully that answers your question. And this is the only video I'm doing today, and I didn't even plan on doing this one. So I appreciate everybody for stopping by, and I will see y'all next time.